The rise of King Saul and the birth of a monarchy in Israel mark a pivotal moment in biblical history, signifying the transition from a tribal confederation to a centralized government under a singular king. This new structure embodied the Hebrews' desire for unity and protection against external threats, such as the Philistines. Initially, Saul was chosen by the prophet Samuel, anointed by divine intervention, and celebrated as the first king who could rally the disparate tribes of Israel into a cohesive force. The significance of Saul's ascension cannot be overstated, as it represents the shift from a theocratic society to one grappling with secular governance, illustrating the complexities of power and ambition. This transformation set the stage for the biblical narrative of leadership, laying foundational lessons about the allure and trials of authority that echo through generations. For instance, modern political situations often reflect on ancient monarchies' ability to unite and govern effectively, yet also grapple with issues of accountability and moral authority. One real-world example that parallels King Saul's story is the formation of modern nation-states, where leaders must unify diverse groups under a single administration. Figures like George Washington, who transitioned from a colonial leader to the first president of a centralized republic, faced pressures similar to Saul's in establishing functional governance while maintaining public trust. Another example is the leadership seen during the decolonization of African nations, where leaders like Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana confronted the challenge of constructing new national identities, akin to Saul's efforts to foster unity among the Hebrew tribes. Supporting opinions often view Saul's rise as both an inspired and cautionary tale. His initial successes illustrate the critical need for decisive leadership, while his eventual fall warns of the perils of unchecked power and mental instability. However, the move to monarchy was not without controversy. Critics argue that this shift marked a departure from spiritual rule, raising questions about divine versus human authority. Some theologians posit that Saul's tragic, tumultuous reign underlined the dangers of prioritizing military prowess and political gain over maintaining divine favor. The rise of King Saul directly influences the subsequent narratives of power and governance in Israel. His story sets a precedent for his successors, notably King David, and forms the background for ongoing discussions on leadership legitimacy, the delicate balance of power, and the moral responsibilities inherent in wielding authority. It is a vital chapter in understanding the broader themes of power and madness that can be seen throughout history. The anointing of Saul, how a king was chosen, refers to the biblical account of how Saul, from the tribe of Benjamin, ascended to kingship in Israel. According to the narrative, Saul was chosen by God and anointed by the prophet Samuel to be the first king of Israel, marking a pivotal transition from a theocratic society led by judges to a monarchy. This anointing underscored the divine right to rule, wherein a king was not just a political leader, but also seen as divinely appointed. The significance of Saul's anointing ties into the larger theme of his rise and fall, illustrating how the initial divine favor can lead to power, yet unchecked power and disobedience can usher in a descent into madness and tragedy. This concept is vital because it sets the stage for understanding the nature of Saul's reign and his eventual downfall. It underscores the tension between divine providence and human agency, highlighting how Saul's inability to adhere to divine commandments led to his ultimate demise, despite his auspicious beginnings. The idea of divine appointment can be parallelly seen in monarchies and governments throughout history that claimed a divine right to rule, like the monarchs of medieval Europe, who similarly believed they were chosen by God. Another real-world application is found in various leadership models and organizations where leaders are sanctified by a board or superior authority, emphasizing the notion of being chosen to lead. Opinions supporting this idea point to the importance of legitimacy in leadership, while highlighting the need for divinely appointed leaders to remain true to their higher calling and responsibilities. Critics, however, argue that such a system can lead to abuses of power and lack of accountability, as leaders might prioritize their perceived divine guidance over the needs of their people. Challenges to this view include the inherent risks when leaders believe they are infallibly guided by divine will, leading to potential hubris. Additionally, some critics of monarchy question the validity of divine right as a legitimate basis for leadership, proposing instead democratic or meritocratic systems. The anointing of Saul connects deeply with his later actions as king and his relationship with Samuel and God. It frames both his achievements and his failures, pointing to the critical lesson that, while power can be divinely granted, it must be exercised with humility and obedience to ethical principles, lest it becomes a path to madness and ruin. This transition from divinely guided leadership to human fallibility reflects a critical exploration of the responsibilities and limits of power. Saul's early reign, marked by triumphs and promises, represents a pivotal chapter in the narrative of Israel's first king. During this period, Saul distinguished himself as a leader of potential and capability. He was anointed by the prophet Samuel, promising a unifying leadership over the fragmented tribes of Israel. Initially, Saul experienced significant triumphs, successfully leading Israel in battles against perennial enemies like the Ammonites, thereby securing crucial military victories that reinforced his authority and inspired confidence among his people. The significance of Saul's early reign is profound in the context of the rise and fall of King Saul, lessons of power and madness. It sets the stage for his subsequent downfall by highlighting the promise and potential of his leadership. Saul's initial successes illustrated the benefits of divinely sanctioned leadership, where dedication to a higher moral and religious code could yield prosperity and stability. However, this period also foreshadowed the challenges of maintaining such a standard. In the real world, leaders often find that their initial triumphs can establish their legitimacy and solidify public support. For instance, political leaders who lead a country through economic renewal or social reform often gain immense popularity early in their careers. Similarly, in the corporate world, CEOs who successfully guide their companies through market expansions or technological innovations can solidify their positions and affirm their strategic visions early on. Opinions supporting Saul's early promise as king suggest that his achievements underscored the potential and hope placed in a divinely appointed leader. Some scholars argue that Saul's successes demonstrate the effectiveness of leadership grounded in faith and community commitment. However, challenges and alternative viewpoints abound. Critics argue that Saul's early reliance on divine intervention and prophetic approval set unrealistic expectations for his reign. Others contend that his initial triumphs were largely situational, relying more on the political and military context than on Saul's personal capabilities. These dissenting views point to the inherent risks of charisma-driven leadership, emphasizing the need for sustainable governance structures. Saul's early reign and its subsequent decline influenced the larger narrative by demonstrating the volatility of power dynamics. The contrast between his early success and later failures reflects the thin line between triumph and madness, offering enduring lessons on the perils of power unchecked by wisdom, humility, and accountability. As Saul's story unfolds, his initial triumphs serve as a potent reminder of the transient nature of power and the need for a steadfast moral compass. The heading, "The Turning Point, Disobedience and Divine Retribution," delves into a crucial episode in the biblical narrative of King Saul, the first king of Israel. This concept revolves around Saul's momentous acts of disobedience against divine commands and the subsequent retribution that follows. In the context of Saul's story, disobedience involves Saul's failure to follow God's explicit instructions, such as when he spared King Agag and the best livestock of the Amalekites, defying God's command to utterly destroy them. Divine retribution, in turn, refers to the consequences Saul faces for his disobedience, including the eventual loss of God's favor in his kingdom. This turning point is significant as it marks a fundamental shift in Saul's reign. It highlights the importance of obedience to divine will, a key theme within the biblical narrative. This moment serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of disregarding divine authority and the ensuing fall from grace and power. Saul's disobedience undermines his leadership credibility and paves the way for David's anointment as his successor, setting the stage for a dramatic transition. In contemporary terms, this point can be analogous to situations where leaders face repercussions for unethical decisions affected by their failure to adhere to moral or legal standards. For instance, corporate scandals involving leaders ignoring regulatory frameworks often result in severe penalties and loss of trust. Similarly, political leaders who overstep their constitutional boundaries may face impeachment or other forms of censure, highlighting a parallel to Saul's divine retribution. However, some scholars argue that Saul's punishment was disproportionately severe, sparking debates about the fairness of such divine justice. Critics might contend this narrative illustrates an overly harsh divine retribution that fails to account for human fallibility. Others suggest that such divine expectations set a standard too high for flawed human beings, questioning the narrative's real-world applicability. Despite these challenges, the theme of disobedience and its consequences underscores the broader narrative of King Saul's rise and fall. It illustrates how individual actions can dramatically influence one's destiny and reshape historical trajectories. This turning point connects to the broader theme by influencing Saul's deteriorating mental state and his subsequent obsession with retaining power at all costs, ultimately highlighting the destructive cycle of disobedience leading to madness and downfall. This concept invites reflection on the timeless interplay between power, accountability, and destiny, offering enduring lessons on leadership and integrity.